Hello everyone, my name is Pearlescent Moon and we're finally back with another video. On the 24th of December in 2019, I started a challenge of creating one build a day for the duration of at least 1 year or 365 days, on which I post every single day on my Twitter and Instagram. I understand a lot of people may wonder why I didn't just start on the 1st of January 2020, but I was much too eager and just wanted to start building. In this video series that will come out every Saturday, keep in mind today was 1 day late, I will go through the builds that I created each week, 7 days of builds at a time. Each episode of this series will go through and explain the process I had undertaken each week and show the progress in time-lapse form. Now that that's said and out of the way, let's get into day 1. Most people pick me as an organics builder, so for the first week I decided to explore my capabilities in structural design. The first build I created didn't have much to it aside from some rough research that helped me discover a possible palette, and then I just started laying down blocks in a shape I liked. Adding diagonals to a build adds some dynamic interest to the structure. Now, I love foliage, so naturally, it turned out to be very green and lush. While creating the structures, I typically found adding a bit of height or variation in the y-coordinate helped for viewer interest and commonly added extra pieces on top of the base shape I'd created. Once I was happy with the essential structure, I moved on to planning the environment that gives the build some context. Creating a singular structure on a flat plane gives it a very out-of-place feel, which I did not want. A winding path through some shallow hills gave it a very peaceful vibe. Add some basic trees, grass, ferns, and a campfire, and we're good to go. I do love the smoke and how it moves, it just adds so much more to the build. When Christmas evening rolled around for the second day, I had originally intended to go with some sort of medieval tower. This did not eventuate. For some reason, I decided to turn it into some cyberpunk-inspired chunk. After some light research, I picked a base grey palette contrasted with some reds and green foliage, because I just like nature that much that it has to be in absolutely everything. Red seemed to be a pretty common signage colour for cyberpunk, so I felt like it was a nice addition. Now, I couldn't really emulate the neon signs, but the main intention was to get the structural style created. However, keep in mind that with each reference I make, I also like to throw my own spin on it and alter it to my liking. Again, I explore the use of diagonals to add a bit of interest to the build. This can be seen all throughout the 7 days worth of builds in the first week. In order to balance out the build a bit more, I added a gap through the middle and created a smaller building in the bottom left. Adding that extra piece gave further impression that it was a small scene rather than a standalone piece. On the third day, I researched some architectural concept art and stumbled upon a Star Wars themed artwork. I didn't feel like creating a square or rectangular structure that day, so I felt inspired by the cylindrical designs and unique shape. This started me on creating some circular vibes towers in which I added some sort of wall attached to the bottommost tower as if it was the entry point to a base. The atmosphere was also completely different and not of this earth, which added a new environment element to play with. I liked the idea of being able to use red sand for a Mars vibe, and created more ground interest by chucking in a few different shades for a gradient. You'll find throughout each build I create that I like to gather a lot of blocks of similar shades and use that to break up the build. Too much of one block type and colour can make the build feel a bit flat. You can also create extra detail this way if you wanted to emulate rust or dust within the build itself. The colour change and patch variants help simulate this effect. Browns are most commonly associated with rust, so this was a colour I defaulted to and added within the palette. This also goes nicely with the orange vibe. Of course, once again, I decided to add a secondary tower up top to add some height interest to the piece. I also added some small details like technology poles coming out of the roof with fences, iron bars, end rods, and redstone torches. I really felt like this kind of detailing just brought the vibe together. Day 4 was inspired by traditional Japanese countryside homes. I based my research upon thatch roof structures, however decided to add my own flair with a prismarine and mushroom roof combo. I went with the soft brown wood palette with splashes of colour here and there to represent flags or sign decoration. When I create diagonal pieces to add onto the buildings, every block I place as detail follows the same rules as if I were building straight. The overhang follows the edges of the walls, and the triangular portion of the roof still goes up the same way as normal, but each piece that increases in height has to be following a diagonal line. If you guys would like me to explain diagonals more in depth, please let me know in the comments below. While detailing, I like to use the lectern block as railings, as they're thicker than a fence and don't connect like walls otherwise would. Their wood texture is also nice and soft to use in a typical structure setting. Just make sure they're facing inwards, as you don't want the red part of the lectern showing on the outside. Unless you want that, it's all up to you. Add some usual greenery to decorate the setting of the home, and we can move on to day 5. Inspired by the Tuscan style of home architecture, day 5 utilizes various diagonals with a sandstone-based palette to create a soft villa vibe. I began by laying out the base shape of the house I wish to create with outlines and full blocks. Starting off with simple shapes at the start helps me get a clean view on what the composition could end up being. If any changes are needed within the composition, it's best to work this out earlier so you're not impacting any fine-tuned surrounding details and leading a large amount of progress. Iron blocks are used to block out the roof, and any extra details that should be split from the base structure are added with placeholder blocks. My original inspiration seemed to use a combo of cylindrical and straight walls, so my structure follows those guidelines, yet goes a bit more wacky in how I've stacked up different levels and arranged each section. A pool at the front added to the villa vibe I was going for, and was later accompanied by a small stream of water to simulate a point of origin. Using granite and terracotta in this palette adds a nice but slight hue change to break up the use of browns and sandy colours. For day 6, I decided to challenge myself more than the previous builds had done. I picked modern as my base theme for that day. If you guys know me, you know I'm not overly fond of creating modern builds, but a big thing about this challenge is going out of the comfort zone and trying something different. As expected, I did struggle a little bit during this build as I just wasn't feeling the style all the way through, but I kept going anyway. My base inspiration was to make some sort of beachside modern mansion. I used very harsh, defined angles with a typical white and brown palette to start off my building practice. I had the idea of having some sort of wooden overhang above the road, which I later moved to the right hand side so as to not obstruct the view of the building by being in the middle. Curving a road with a slow incline is yet another example of height variance to create dynamic interest to the build. If you create a build on a completely flat plane, it feels more like the build is enveloped by the vast nothing surrounding it, compared to being complemented by its terrain context. Ask yourself, when running in a straight line down a Minecraft street, do you prefer to run on completely flat ground or run up an incline with slabs or some sort, Which seems more interesting to you? Everyone has different preferences though, so if you like completely flat, then there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. This is my own personal preference. A unique block used in this build is the loom. It works great as a garage door when placed sideways. After adding some lush green gardens and extra details, I was ready to call this one done. The final day of the first week was a pretty tough one. For approximately 80% of the build time, my inspiration and motivation just was not working out. I constantly pushed forward and kept experimenting different possible ways that I might be able to make it satisfying, and eventually came to a happy conclusion. My original inspiration was of course based off a medieval vibe, but in the end it turned into some sort of mashup that I can't quite identify. I put my own style and flair into it after many palette changes and decided to play with a contrasting red nether brick for the roof. The jack-o'-lanterns worked nicely as a light source, as well as adding a complementary orange shade to go with the red. Browns worked nicely within that palette, and white served as a clear contrast for the walls to be separately defined from the roof pieces. Small details like balconies, pathways, door entryways, and gardens are added that grant an occupied context. Without such, it would feel like the building is not lived in, nor has any life added to it. I eventually became happy with this build once I started adding windows with overhanging roofs that allowed for that little bit of extra detail. Overall, to conclude the first week of builds, my methods for building are carried and seen through each creation I make. I begin each piece by blocking out my layout or composition, to which I then replace with a base coat of colour for the palette I've chosen. Once that's down, I start adding all the details like roof linings, lamps, greenery, fences, all that good jazz. I think about what might be existing within the environment that can complement the build I'm making, such as my choice on a rocky or grassland terrain. And that's it for the first 7 days of our 365-day endeavour. Each week that I upload these videos, the commentary may dwindle a little as I repeat my processes, but for now we'll see how we go. Again, if you would like to see these builds daily before they go live on the channel, I'm uploading them all to my Instagram and Twitter as I create them. I'll be leaving those links below. Thank you guys so much for sticking around and watching my videos. I'm excited to get back into it and bring more content to you and this channel once again. Alright, and that's me done for the day. I'll see you all again soon. Bye guys!